Welcome to the Financial Feast Podcast. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Zach.
And today we're going to be talking about when to retire. So we have a list that we've come up with here of things that we're comfortable with you retiring if you've thought of these 7 things. Notice one thing we said there, we're comfortable if you've thought of these 7 things, not if you hit a specific age. Right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are so focused on I gotta get to this age before I can retire, and that's really not where we're at.
Right. And when it comes down to it, there is schools of thought out there that talk about retiring early.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And that is an entirely possible thing.
Yeah, and we can definitely talk about FIRE if anybody is probably thinking about FIRE, right? And we can talk about that at a later date because that's probably the big one.
Right. And for those that don't know, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. It is a school of thought that's out there to get a specific number to retire on. But really what we're focusing on is 7 things that we think need to be addressed before you consider retiring.
Yeah, we just want to kind of give, and I don't think either one of us is saying this is completely comprehensive. These are the only 7 things.
Right.
But to us, when we're thinking through, when we're working with clients and people that we're helping, and they're thinking through these retirement things, these are pretty big things that people should be considering.
Yes.
So we wanted to put them all in a nice, easy list.
Absolutely. So we'll start with number 1 here, and that is health insurance. It's a big one.
It is a big one. It's something that a lot of people also really just don't understand.
Yeah.
It's a little intimidating because what is health insurance? I don't know.
Yeah, everyone knows insurance is expensive, right?
Yes, insurance is very expensive,
Right.
for sure.
In America, it's a very expensive commodity right now. So things to think about under health insurance, though, right? Who's going to take care of you?
Yeah, no, that's a big deal. I mean, if you have kids, that's helpful. Mm-hmm. Personally, my wife and I don't have kids, so the who's going to take care of us is a big question.
Right, and planning for that is important. And then another thing to think about is obviously the question of how long will you live, no one knows. But there are some things out there that, genetics wise, your aunt and uncle, grandparents generally live to be around this age. You kind of have a data point there, right?
Yeah, genetically different families live typically different ages, right? We have all heard of those random people who live to be like 115.
Yeah.
If that's in your genetics, maybe you need to be thinking through that and maybe don't plan on your money retiring or running out when you're 75.
Right. And also just another little thing of women generally need to pay more over the longer period than men because their lifespan is longer in general.
Yeah, generally. I think it's like 2-3 years is on average how long women are living longer.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something to think about when you're planning under the health insurance side. And does your retirement income plan factor in healthcare inflation?
Yeah, inflation is one of those big buzzwords, right? Everybody's
Right now.
all about that inflation now because
right now it's bad.
Jumped up. But inflation is not a new thing.
Nope.
It's not a thing that's only happening now when the market's really bad, right? Mm-hmm. Inflation always is going on.
Yes.
And especially when you're talking about health insurance, inflation's raising at about 4.5% on average every single year.
Yes, and to account for that is a crucial thing where maybe you can afford it this year, but building into your plan and budget here that can I afford it year over year for however long I'll need it.
Yeah, so I was reading an article that Fidelity put out a stat, and this is in today's dollar, that they said the average couple who retires at the age of 65 will spend about $280,000 in healthcare for their retirement length. Now, I don't know exactly what that length is, so if you're living longer, that number is going to go up. But then also, if we're taking into account inflation,
yes,
that a 4.5% increase, and if you're retiring in 30 years, that's not going to be $280,000 anymore.
No, that'll be way more.
Yeah.
That's definitely something to consider. And another thing, too, is can you keep your doctor in retirement? Some people have been going to the same doctor for quite a while, and they might really like that doctor. And, when they get off maybe their company medical plan or whatever the case may be, can they still go to where they want to go?
Yeah, I've actually been chatting with my grandparents have a second house in Florida, and that was one of the biggest things that they had to deal with when they first moved down there, because they weren't used to the area. They weren't used to who was down there. They didn't know any doctors. They didn't know any medical professionals, and they had to figure all that out new when they had been going to the doctors where they originally live in Pennsylvania for, I don't know, 20, 25 years.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that might not even cross your mind, but when you're really thinking about it, something to consider. So health insurance, big thing to think about.
Big thing, a lot of different subpoints there.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing to hit on as well, the second thing to think about is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, when's all that take place? Just kind of having an idea of when that kicks in, when you're allowed to use it, how to use it, can you use it, is also important to at least consider and to have in mind,
Yeah,
right?
and we're not going to go into super deep, talk on this topic, because these things will kick in your 60s. Mm-hmm. So if you're 40 right now, you're 30 right now, you're 20 right now, maybe this is something that you should at least have in the back of your mind. You should at least be thinking through, but it's not going to affect you the way that some of these other things will. If you retire at 35, you need to have a plan for health insurance, right?
Yes.
If you retire at 35, you don't necessarily need to think through Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security right now, because it's going to be different access.
Yeah, it will. And, with that, another thing to think about is kind of your lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is a different lifestyle, different income, different what they're used to bringing in a month and what they're used to living off of. So this is different for every single person out there.
Yeah. So when we talk about lifestyle, right, what do we mean? If you're trying to explain, if somebody asks you, well, what do you mean by my lifestyle? I need to think about my lifestyle. What is my lifestyle? What would you kind of explain that as?
Yeah, I would actually say it's in its most basic form, it's just how you spend your money on a monthly basis. So a family of 5, married couple, family, kids, 3 kids, they are spending their money differently than a single person in their 20s.
Yeah, for sure.
A single person in their 20s, might be renting, might be just starting on a new job, whereas the couple that might have been married for 10 years, they might have worked up the corporate ladder, depending on what they're doing. They're bringing in more, therefore their lifestyle is different. They can maybe take vacations. Do they want to keep doing that if they retire? Do they want to keep living that kind of lifestyle of vacations and making sure you can afford the stuff that you have? And
Yeah.
that's something to consider.
Yeah,
something
if
to
you've
take into
worked
mind.
up, right, because you're a hard worker and you've earned it, you've worked up to being able to have that Mercedes-Benz and that 5-bedroom house, and be able to go on a nice vacation with your wife and your kids every single year. You don't, when you retire, you don't now want to have to sell your house, get an old beater car, start renting a 1-bedroom house, and not go on vacation anymore.
Yeah.
You want to keep up the things you've been doing.
Right.
And that's important to think through.
Yes. And to go along with that, personal goals that you might have. Maybe you have a personal goal of you want to take a trip around the world.
Yeah. It's funny because our anniversary, our wedding anniversary is, I think, like 3 months apart.
Yes.
And we're coming up. We're coming up on 8 years this year. But it's going to be 10 years in a couple years. Obviously, that's how math works. And we've been talking as couples, your wife and my wife, and then us, have been talking about going on a cruise.
Yes.
For our 10-year.
Yep.
And it was cool because the last time I was over at your house, I was chatting with your wife and you about one of the cruise lines has like 180-day around the world cruise.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, like, wouldn't that be awesome to do?
Yeah. Tour the world, eat good food. I mean, see amazing things. What could go wrong?
Yeah. Well, what could go wrong is I don't have enough money to pay for that.
Yep. Something to think about. Right back to where we were, right? So, these are all things that, once again, we're recommending to at least think about before you consider retiring. And the biggest thing maybe to think about, even despite all the other stuff we talked about, is the assets that we have currently.
Yeah. Yeah. So next week, just a little precursor, we'll talk about how to retire, and we'll get into some of these asset classes a little bit more. But when we talk about assets, what, as a person working with somebody who wants to understand what retirement is and they don't really understand what assets are, how would you explain an asset to someone in the context of retirement?
Yeah, I would say in the context of retirement, it's more or less just something that is on the positive side of the ledger. And what I mean by that is you have assets and liabilities. And I come from an accounting background, and that's kind of how I think. Liabilities is more debt, assets is more something that you could sell or liquidate that would get you income. And an asset is on the positive side. So therefore, what you're thinking about is, what do I have that's positive? Whether it be cash, stocks, mutual funds, and the list can go on and on and on. But that is something that you have that is an asset that will make you money versus something that is costing you money.
Now, the interesting thing about that is when a lot of people are thinking retirement assets, they're thinking mutual funds, they're thinking stocks and bonds and ETFs and all these different things. But could an asset also be a physical object, maybe something that is more tangible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could call a house an asset, right?
So if I have a rental home,
Yeah.
that's an asset.
Yes.
What if I have and the other question I think that goes along with this is, does an asset have to actively be making me money every single month in order to be a positive asset?
No, but what it does have to be doing is not costing you money.
Okay.
That's how we would define an asset, is that your house, say you have a house for $200,000 and you paid off, you have a loan now for 150. You could sell it for 200, that would make you 50K. So you would have an asset of 50K, but you would still have a liability of that 150 that you owe.
Okay.
And that's kind of how to think about that.
As long as you're coming out on the positive side,
Right.
we're going to consider that an asset. So maybe a goofy illustration, but if I love shoes, right? Could a collection of Air Jordans be an asset?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that if you could get money out of it, you could say it is. But to be honest, it's a niche market, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, there's been people who have like a famous baseball card.
Yeah.
Coins collecting. Right?
Talking about baseball cards, we're big baseball fans.
Yeah.
My buddy, good friend, I'm gonna milk this for all it's worth. My good friend who I went to high school with plays for the Yankees.
Yes.
His name's Lou Trevino. I'm gonna drop that. Maybe he will get tagged in this and we'll get more views. But he plays for the Yankees. So my wife and I are watching the Yankees game, and Aaron Judge, before the postseason, hit home run that was number 62. Which, for those of you who don't watch baseball and don't care, that's a big thing because it broke the home run record that has been around for like 60 plus years. So the guy who caught that ball, I think, was like potentially, there was a auction house that was saying it could go for like $2.5 million.
Yeah.
For one ball.
Yeah.
Now that's an asset.
That is an asset.
That guy just went to a baseball game, caught a ball, and now has a $2.5 million asset.
Yeah, and now he could ask the question, can he retire?
There you go.
It's right there.
Maybe he could.
Maybe he could. Who knows his life circumstances? We don't know. But something to think about.
Yeah, so the flip side of an asset then is a debt.
Yes.
Right? So what do we consider debts?
Debts are more or less just what you owe someone else. And, that could be credit card debt, that could be a house payment, that could be a car payment, student loans. There's a lot out there. Personal loans.
Business loans.
Business
Yeah,
loans,
all kinds of
401k loans.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there. But basically, and for those who don't know, if you want to know what your net worth is, just take your assets minus your debt, and that is your net worth.
Yeah.
And what you want is to have a positive net worth, of course, especially before you think about retiring. But carrying debt into retirement, that is something that you really want to consider.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that? And if so, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and I don't think that we are 100% sold on you shouldn't have any debt whatsoever going into retirement.
Right. I think you just have to have a plan for how you're going to attack that debt.
Right.
Before you think about retiring. And just being aware that you have it and that it needs to be taken care of while you're in retirement, and you might not be actively making money as you were before in a job circumstance. So, pivoting away from that, how are you going to pay your debts? And just know that.
Yeah, and I think an easy one that a lot of people think about is with rental homes. That's something where you buy a house for $200,000 and the money you're getting from that rent is helping you pay that mortgage every single month. You still owe money, so it's still a debt, but it's also an asset in a way because hopefully, if you're doing a good job, you're making more than what you're paying in mortgage, and you can actually benefit some of that in retirement and use that income then to help you maybe retire sooner or help you toward your goals with personal goals or whatever.
Yes. Making sure to think about all of that is very important.
Yeah.
And then another thing that you might not have thought about as much is, you've thought about so far healthcare, health insurance, kind of branched on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. You've thought about your lifestyle, your personal goals, whatever they may be. Are they planned out? Assets, what do you have? Debt, how are you going to attack it? But then where do you retire?
Yeah, and this is a big question for a couple of different reasons. I think number one is a lot of people want to be close to their family, right, when they retire.
Yeah.
Some people may not want to be close to their family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe when you retire, you just want to be by yourself.
As far away as you can, maybe.
So thinking through those things, I think is important. And then also weather-wise, I think that's a huge thing for people.
Yeah.
At the retirement, usually when we think of retirement, we're thinking of people going to Florida or we're thinking of people going to Arizona. Why?
Yes.
Because it's not snowing there, and when you retire, you don't want snow.
Yes. And you no longer have a job holding you down to a specific location anymore that you might have had to deal with. And now you can consider, maybe I don't want to live in this city or this area.
Yeah, or maybe you don't even want to live in this country. Maybe
Yeah.
you want to move to a different country that you've always wanted to travel to and visit, and now's the opportunity that you have to go and do, and that could kind of branch into your personal goals on, hey, I've always wanted to see this place, and now I have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And, another thing to think about when you consider where do you want to retire is also what we had mentioned before earlier. Can you keep your doctor in retirement? Is that something that is important to you? Do you have a medical thing that's kind of going on that you're like, you know what? I kind of want to be near the area where I might have a heart problem or something like that, and your heart doctor so well, and you don't want to go through a whole new thing. Maybe you stay in the area for a while.
No, that's a huge point to think through. And I think these 7 things, while certainly not comprehensive and not covering everything, I think these are pretty basic fundamental things that people really should start kind of thinking through as they're considering retirement and thinking about, well, when should I retire? Now, before we end this episode, and next week we're going to go into the how to retire, I just wanted to kind of make a little statement here on, we did not, in all these different 7 things, one of the 7 things was not, you need X amount of money to retire. Why did we not say, for point number 3, you need to think about having $3 million. And until you have $3 million, you can't even think about you should retire. Why does that not apply to this today?
Yeah, I would say it kind of harkens back to the lifestyle, right? We don't know what your lifestyle is, therefore, and we don't know your assets, how much you have, and what your debts are. Therefore, it's really hard to come up with a cure-all amount of money that will work for you. And that's why it's so unique when you plan retirement, is that it's different for every single person, and therefore, there is no set amount of money for every single person to have the same amount of money. Like, that's just unreasonable to think about. So when you think about it, the amount of money isn't necessarily as important as thinking about all these other things and then making sure that you do have enough money to cover these things for however long you plan to be in retirement or not working.
Yeah, because if you're willing to move to a place that has lower level expenses, right, then you can retire on less money. If I want to retire, and I'm not picking on a certain part of the country because I don't like that part of the country, but if I want to retire in the Midwest, Oklahoma, Kansas, whatever, in more of a rural farm situation, my assumption is that's going to cost me less than if I wanted to retire in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So I would probably need less money to retire if on a farm in the middle of Kansas than I would if I wanted to live in New York or Los Angeles or one of these big metropolitan areas. And that's something to consider.
Yeah, as absolutely it is. And maybe you just want to rent an RV or buy an RV and
Yeah,
just
true.
go tour America and be in an RV, and that's where you want to live. Like it's all up to you, and that's the most fun part about it all is personalizing it to you and making sure that you personally are okay.
Yeah, and as long as you've hit these 7 other things, this, the health insurance and the lifestyle and the personal goals and the assets and all these different things that we've talked about, if that number works for you and you've thought through all those things and you can get to a place where whatever number you have or whatever number you are working toward is going to work for those goals, then if you want to retire at 30, have at it. I
Yeah.
mean, live your life, enjoy yourself while you can. But if you can't understand what that number is, and this is why that retirement planning is important.
Right.
Because we don't want people to be like, "Oh, I think I'm good. Retire at 50." And then in 2 years be like, "Uh-oh,
Yes.
I've ran out of money.
Yes.
Now I need to go back to work and figure all this out again."
Yes.
That's what we're trying to avoid.
And, when we get down to it, like we said, we're going to talk about how to retire. So far, we've talked about retirement, kind of what it is, some misconceptions about retirement, why should we think about retirement, and we just kind of covered when to retire, or at least don't retire until you've at least thought of these things.
Yeah.
And then we'll go into how to retire in our next episode. But
Yeah.
until then, we do ask that you like, subscribe, go visit our website at thefinancialfeastpod.com.
Yeah. Yeah, and share this with anybody else that might be interested in this topic and might find this helpful. Because that really is our goal.
Yes.
Is to just reach out to more people and provide a service of educating.
Yeah, just helping others. That's really why we're doing this. Making sure that people who might not have heard these things hear them sooner than later.
Yeah.
With that, we'll see you next time.